So here's a question for you. Who controls the way you think? Who controls your mind? You're probably going to think, I control my mind. I'm in control of how I think. I'm in control of how I process information. But are you really? Now, if you really want to know how the brain works, then you got to pick up a book like this, Neuroscience, Exploring the Brain. You know, if you want to have some casual reading, right? It's only about 900 pages. But in here, you can unlock some of the secrets of what we know into the way we think, the way our brain operates, how we process information. But now back to the original question. Who controls the way we think? We want to say it's ourselves, but in reality, the way we think is shaped by our learned experiences and based on the ability to process information. So we grow up, we're born with the ability to see, to touch, to smell, to taste, and to hear. So we have our five senses. We have the ability to try to interpret what's taking place around us within our world. And based on our experiences and based on the processing power of our brains, because not everybody has the same type of brain, right? Everybody's brain is somewhat different, but based on the inputs we receive within our lives, that will determine how we think in the future. So there's always been a goal of how can we better understand how the brain works, or how can we better understand what influences people. And there's a whole bunch of research on this. There's been a discussion on this since the dawn of time. Philosophers have been talking about this. You're going to see in religious texts, there's a lot of talk about this. You're going to see in academia, there's a lot of research on this, in psychology, in every aspect of life, trying to determine what controls the way we think. And the answer seems basic. It goes back to the fact that we are processing information we receive on a daily basis based on our five senses. Our brain is structured in a way, it takes all that information, it digests it, and then it processes it, and we develop thoughts from that. Pretty basic, sounds pretty basic, right? But the reality is, it's a little bit more complex than that. And it seems like technology has your number. So even though we don't know that much about the human brain when it comes to exactly how it operates, there's still a lot that we do know. And what we do know has been applied in a technological sense and the dissemination of information over the past several decades. We've seen that in various ways from the legacy media, in terms of radio and TV, how these mediums have been able to help to shape and drive a society. Think about it, if you only have one source of information, and that's the only input you're getting, then how diverse is your frame of thought going to be? What ability do you have to really discern what's taking place with limited information being presented, or just one-sided information? The quality of your inputs, the quality of the information you receive matters. And if you're trying to get to the source of truth, and that's something I'm always striving to get to, you have to be able to have a diverse but credible source of information and to be able to have the discernment in order to figure out what it all means. Now that matters. And there's three skills technically that you need in order to do this. You need, like I said, discernment. You need critical thinking skills, and you need to be able to think logically. Think about it. If we only operate based on emotions without processing the information that's getting presented to us, that can pose a problem. But if we also flip it to the other side, if we only think logically, then we're just like Thanos in the Marvel movie Endgames, where he just wants to snap his fingers to reduce the population of the universe by 50%. Because logically, in his mind, the universe didn't have enough resources to sustain itself. So we need a healthy balance of emotion and logical thinking as well. And then that dives into the fact that I think there is a slight difference between being smart, being intelligent, and being wise. And if you really understand the three of those, combine that with the skill set of having discernment, critical thinking, and thinking logically, then you'll be able to process information a lot better. Really try to get a grasp of what's taking place within the world. What is reality? What is the source of truth? So over the past few decades, we've had, like I mentioned, the legacy media that's really had an influence in the way we think in terms of our society, the information we receive. That gives us our worldview. But over time, we've seen that the influence of TV itself, we've seen that the influence of radio and the influence of print media, that influence has been waning, especially when we had the rise of the internet, and then when we had social media, where people were able to share information all over the world in a matter of a second. When social media came on the scene, we had the introduction of algorithms, and algorithms really shape how we see things, how we get information. It filters the information we get. Sometimes it leads us towards confirmation bias. And that's not healthy, because if you only get one type of information from one type of source, and that could be detrimental to your thinking process. But it seems like the algorithms have been, making us go into these bubbles of information, or getting us to be part of these small groups and trying to categorize us in very specific ways. And the reason for that is because obviously these social sites and websites in general, and a lot of these technology companies, they got to make money. So in order to make money, they either have to sell you a service, sell you a product, or sell advertising. In order to do that effectively, they have to be able to categorize us in some way, shape, or form. So it's this combination of categorizing us and then putting us inside of little groupings and bubbles where we have confirmation bias, that we run into a problem. And it's something that we face on a daily basis, and it's something that is really impactful in terms of how society functions. Because the ultimate goal is for society to reach some type of advancement. And the way to do that is to try to educate and try to inform the masses. The more informed people are, and the better the ability to digest that information, to have discernment, think critically on it, think logically, and see how to apply it. And that's how you move a society forward. And hopefully you get people to the point where we can have a good conversation. And that's something you don't see nowadays. You don't see people having good conversations. You see people engage in talk where they're talking to each other, not with each other, and where we're not really understanding what another person is thinking. Because all we're doing is, while they're speaking, we hear words coming out of their mouth, but we're really trying to think about what we're going to say next ourselves. So we're not really taking into consideration what they're saying. And that's problematic. There's been a movement over the past, couple of years, couple of decades, to really focus on the individual. And every individual matters. Yes, 100%. But then we have to look at ourselves as a collective as well, because we work better as a society that works together. Think about every single major insect or animal within the planet. You have your bees, you have your ants, you have animals in the jungles like the lion. You have different groupings of life forms that work together in order to accomplish a goal. We work better when we work together. So social media has the algorithms that really guide us in a specific direction, and that can be used in a way that can really be profitable for the tech company itself. But when it comes to the way we shape our thoughts, may not be the best. Now, the thing is, a lot of what I'm going to say has pros and cons, right? Because a lot of these have been very beneficial to our advancement. The invention of the computer has made it possible to process a crazy amount of information a lot faster than we could do individually. I mean, if you do some research, you're going to see that it takes about 20 watts of electricity to power the human brain. But if you're looking at a supercomputer to power that, or if you're looking to train a large language model, just to power it per day, and I'm not talking about the purchasing of the equipment, but just the electrical cost itself for a small cluster of GPUs and CPUs and things of that nature, we're looking at about $125 per day estimated based on the wattage used by the actual GPU. If you think about an NVIDIA GPU, probably takes about 400 watts of electricity. And then if you multiply that by, say, 100 GPUs, and then you take into account the kilowatt hours that it's going to actually use per day. And then if you look at local electrical costs, then yeah, it adds up to about $125 per day. And in comparison, the human brain that takes about 20 watts of power per day, that's only about 6 to 7 cents. So yeah, I just threw a whole bunch of numbers at you, and you're probably saying, what does that have to do with this video? Well, the thing is that it's about how we process information, how we get information. Because think about it, like I said, we have 5 senses. Our brain processes what we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we smell, what we touch. It processes all that, and it gives us an interpretation of the world around us, our worldview. But then if we take into consideration the fact that we only have a limited amount of websites that we go to, maybe we're part of just a limited amount of groups, or maybe we watch just 1 or 2 news channels, then we're limiting the information we're receiving, and we're putting a lot of trust into these organizations. And like I said, the influence of legacy media has been waning over the years. Print media is not doing as well as it did before. TV is not doing the same. Radio is, or doesn't have the same impact that it once had. And for the past decade, it seems like social media has been the way information has been presented to us. Information on websites, blogs. If you wanted to learn something new, you Google it. Back in the day before Google, before the internet, before the computer wave, it was libraries. Libraries still exist. There's still a great way to get information, but it's not the number one way we get information on a daily basis. And now with artificial intelligence on the scene, all that processing of data, all that processing of information is really being filtered. And it seems like we only have a couple of players within the game. And those players own real estate within your brain. And they're the ones that help to shape the way you think. Think about it. If you only get information from one type of source, like I mentioned, your thought process, the way you think, the way you operate, what shapes your worldview is dependent on that medium. And that's a lot of trust we're putting into that. And that's why I believe that we need to make sure that we keep other ways of gaining information accessible. We still need libraries. We still need books. I mean, think about it. We just had the internet outage that just took place where CrowdStrike had an issue with the patch file, and it impacted a lot of different businesses and entities and a lot of access to information. It impacted the airlines, it impacted banking, it impacted a lot of things that we take for granted on a daily basis. So having physical books is probably still a good thing to have. But then at the same time, we still need the internet. There's a whole conversation about the dead internet theory. Has the internet already died? Or is it in a state of dying? I think the internet has definitely changed over the years, but I think we have to do our best to make sure that it's still a viable medium, a viable way for us to get information, because we want to have a diversity of thoughts. One of the best things we could do is to democratize the way people share information. Yeah, that's a tagline from WordPress. I'm a programmer, I'm a developer, and I think about all this all the time. Having diversity of thought is extremely important. But even there, algorithms come into play, right? Because before artificial intelligence, you had basically just Google when it came to the internet, right? You had them as the dominant search engine. And we had search engine optimization where websites will implement tactics in order to make sure they can be on page 1. There's a lot of filtering going on. Sometimes you get the information you want, sometimes it's hidden on page 2, and you're going to find that sometimes it's hidden on page 3. And think about it. When's the last time you went to page 3 of Google? It's probably been a while, and it's probably just to see if your site pops up anywhere. But we have to make sure that we keep the internet alive. We have to make sure that we keep the ability for people to share their thoughts via their blogs or their websites. That has to still exist. That has to continue to exist. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't use artificial intelligence. I use AI on a daily basis, and I think it's a great tool. But at the same time, I do understand and know that we're giving a lot of trust to just a handful of companies that are really going to be able to have the ability to filter how we think at a bigger level, at a higher level. Now, there's a lot of benefit to being able to access and process a vast amount of data without having to actually search for it, read every single blog post, but instead have the AI do it for us and then to give us either a snippet of or a summary of what's being said, or just to generate an answer that's going to fulfill our needs. But what if it's wrong? Or what if the information changes? That's something we have to take into consideration. What happens in a world where they say, you know what, we're not going to print books anymore because it's bad for the environment. We don't want to cut down trees. I mean, how could you actually print a book anymore? It's not environmentally friendly. We need our trees. So I could see that happening. I could see them saying, we have to limit the amount of books we print. And then I could see the conversation taking place of, we really don't need the internet anymore because we have a couple of players like Google or OpenAI or Microsoft with Copilot or Claude or any of these other types of artificial intelligence services that can give us the information we need in a much more efficient way. Now, it's not energy efficient nowadays. It's still more energy efficient to run a Google query than it is to prompt an AI. But in terms of generating the information, in terms of accessing the information, it's faster. So there might be an effort to, over time, it's not going to happen now, but over time, eliminate the idea of blogs, of websites in general, as we know it today, and to really become overly reliant on artificial intelligence. And then at that point, who shapes your thoughts? Who's in control of the way you think? Is it you? Or is it the way you consume information? The entities that control the information you consume? I think we know the answer. And that's why I think it's important that we learn critical skills. Critical thinking skills, logical thinking, the ability to discern what's right and wrong, what's true and false. Discernment is something that's extremely important. Logic is extremely important. And that's something that I think we're focusing less on nowadays. I think we act more emotionally. And emotions are very important because they help to limit the actions we take, and sometimes you want to limit the actions you take. Again, going back to Thanos within Marvel in the Endgame, a movie where he wanted to snap his fingers because logically there weren't enough resources. So he wanted to eliminate 50% of society, or 50% of the life forms within the universe. But emotions allow us not to take actions so drastic. But at the same time, if we have no control over our emotions, they can take control of us. And I think we know what that feels like. Sometimes when you get really scared, or sometimes when you get really angry, or a better case, sometimes when you're being tickled by a friend or someone you love and you just can't stop laughing. Feelings and emotions are very important, but so is logical thinking. And that goes back to what I say a lot, is that there's a difference between being smart, being intelligent, and being wise. Now, I know the definitions are going to be a little bit different depending on the source you look at, but in general, being smart in the society how we have structured is about being able to learn how a system operates. We live within a system, and smart people are able to learn how that system works and be able to rise within that system. That system is based on our education, is based on how we handle our finances, based on how we apply the knowledge that we learn. But what if your system is broken? And that's where intelligence and wisdom come in. Now, with intelligence, is a little bit more than just being smart. It's about being able to identify any flaw within the system itself, looking at it from the outside in instead of looking at it from the inside out. Because like they say, you sometimes cannot see the forest through the trees. And that's how intelligence operates. Intelligence requires more problem-solving skills, more critical thinking skills, more logical reasoning. And then wisdom, or being wise, is like the third level. It's like having greater discernment, being able to understand the long game. And that's very important because we have a lot of information being presented to us on a daily basis. And I'm making this video because I've been presented with different news articles in terms of what's taking place within our world, what's taking place within our local society, our nation, all the different conflicts, and trying to digest everything that's taking place when I can't actually see it myself. And that's another thing, because we see our world, our immediate world, based on our five senses. But I'm not physically in other locations, so I have to depend on other sources to provide information. Now, if that information is one-sided, or if it's leaning towards a certain goal that may be contrary to my goals, can I be aware of that? Being able to actually look at it and being able to discern whether or not it's accurate information, having the intelligence, being able to critically think about it, looking at different sources, not getting caught within a bubble of confirmation bias and being put into a group where it becomes an echo chamber, but instead trying to get diversity of thoughts and trying to think about, or to deduce, what is right and what is wrong, what is true and what is false, what is accurate, or am I being manipulated? So there's a battle going on for control of the way we think as individuals and as a collective. It's been happening for thousands of years, but more so within the past couple of decades because of media, legacy media at this point, but we're talking about radio, TV, and print media. But then it became even more so when we started introducing websites and social media. Social media really made it extremely powerful in terms of grouping and categorizing people and using algorithms in order to determine what a person's gonna see. And again, these companies, they need to make money, which means they either have to sell you a service, a product, or advertising. And now with artificial intelligence, the information you get can be really quick, the access to information, but it's really important that we have the ability to discern whether or not there's a bias within that information. I mean, that's why I like math, because 2 + 2 is 4. It's not emotional. It just is. It's just mathematical. It's just, by the way it operates, it's just logical. But society is not just based on math, right? Because if you start looking at the stock market, if you only invest in the absolute best companies based on the fundamentals of their reports, their annual reports, and you start looking at, is the company profitable? Is the company performing to the best ability? Do they have the best people working there? Do they have great ideas? Then you're going to see there wouldn't be as many companies selling on NASDAQ or the stock exchange. The valuation of some of these companies would be different. But I think the majority of people know that when it comes to stocks, when it comes to the way we handle finances, emotions play a big role in that. And what triggers our emotions? It's the information we receive. And it's the same whether you're talking about any decision you're going to make within your daily life. So understanding how the brain works is extremely important, and understanding how your brain works is extremely important. And having access to good information and being able to identify when something's trying to change the way you think, or when something's trying to really influence you and drive you in a certain direction, how to be able to take a step back, look at it, and make a sound judgment decision. And to be able to make a good quality decision based on the information you're receiving. And then find alternative information. It's hard. It's confusing. It seems like everything is, or every type of media or every type of medium is trying to influence us. And that's been true since the existence of humanity. There's always been power structures. There's always been an attempt to try to influence. But the most important thing that we can do is to control what influences us and to make sure we have diverse inputs of information. So what has the greatest influence on the way you think? Is it still legacy media? Is it social media? Is it podcasting, because that's becoming a big thing nowadays? Or are you getting all of your information from artificial intelligence? And how does that impact us as a society? And what happens if the information we get gets overly filtered to the point that there's no original or creative thought? That's the $1 trillion question. All right, so sound off down below. Do you have control over the way you think? Are you able to think critically about the information you're being presented with? Or do you let your emotions guide you a little bit too much? Let me know, and I'll catch you in the next video.